So this is Elizabeth Warren's speech for analyzing logos and appeal to logic, video 3, page 3. Across the board, our government is failing to fix the problems that face our working families. So again, we're starting with another problem with the government, right? The government is failing, that's a problem, to fix the problems that face our working families. Instead, it's making problems worse by giving more money, more power, and more advantages, a little parallel structure right there, to those who already have all three. And so often, whether it leads to poisoned water or toxic bank loans, communities of color are hit first and hit hardest. So Warren is analyzing, here's a problem and another problem, right? Communities of color are hit first and hit hardest. Our government systematically favors the rich over the poor, our donor class over the working class, and the well-connected over the disconnected. Again, here's some problems. So we're seeing Warren list off problem after problem from the end of page 2 with that parallel structure at a time when blah, blah, blah. And then again, listing problems here at the top of page 3. She identifies this is deliberate and we need to call it what it is. Corruption, plain and simple. So earlier when Warren identified that something was not a problem, it was in fact a crisis, that diction shift really targeted the audience's emotion. And right here, this diction shift discussing government's corruption is very intentional, right? And she uses that corruption very intentionally. So that's a diction move that really ends up affecting the pathos, right? Because if you say to someone, do you want your government corrupt or not corrupt? Hands down, everybody's going to say not corrupt. But she's identifying this is corruption within the government. And she echoes it again. Corruption has seeped into the fabric of our government, lifting thousands of decisions away from the public good and toward the desires of those at the top. And over time, bit by bit, like a cancer eating away at our democracy, corruption has eroded Americans' faith in the government. Right here, what Warren does is she uses that word like, which is a comparison. And she is comparing right here corruption to cancer, right? Cancer is eating away at our democracy and corruption has eroded Americans' faith in our government. So right here, this is what you could call an analogy or, a comparison, a metaphor. It's a simile, most directly using that word like. And analogies in speeches, and when you're using analogies in comparisons and really trying to persuade an audience, it can be a strong analogy or it can be a weak analogy. If something is a weak analogy, then it would be fallacious or false, right? It would be something that's illogical. And so it's actually up to the audience to determine whether this is a strong or a weak analogy. But Warren goes directly to almost address this. She says, I know that's a stark comparison. And if you look stark up, that's harsh or blunt. So she says, I know that analogy is severe. But I'm not here to describe the death of democracy. I'm here to talk about fighting back. I'm here because I believe change is hard, but change is possible. So right here, we're seeing a shift. Change is hard, change is possible. So she's going to begin to look for a solution to all of the problems she's addressed over the course of the first 2 pages. This last page and really second half of the page is really beginning to look at the solutions. And she begins, change can start with reforming how our largest companies operate. Last week, I introduced the accountability or the Accountable Capitalism Act, which is her, bill, her legislation that serves as a solution to her identified problems. And it would restore the once common idea that the giant American corporations should look out for a broad range of American stakeholders. And then she lists her solution directly. She identifies that these large corporations would look out for general Americans. It would require companies to put their workers on the boards instead of having separate board members. It would limit the ability of executives to get rich quick, right? And it gives shareholders and directors a real say in corporate political spending. This bill could go a long way restoring the real economic democracy in America, and in the process, it would ensure that when American businesses engage with government, they're speaking on behalf of their entire communities, not simply megaphones for the wealthy and powerful. So all this solution right here is targeting those problems that Warren is identifying, that American government is giving more money, more power, and more advantages to those who already have them. And putting money back into, instead of putting money back into the rich's pockets, distributing it over the over all of Americans. And so she continues, today I'm introducing the most ambitious anti-corruption legislation proposed in Congress since Watergate. That's a kind of causation. So because of Watergate, right, that scandal, we saw the trust in American government decrease down to 30-something%. And also, she's introducing anti-corruption legislation because of Watergate, or because of some of the effects since and after Watergate. She identifies this as an aggressive set of reforms that would work fundamentally to change the way Washington does business. And it has one real aim, one real focus: to take power in Washington away from the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected who have corrupted our government, and put power back in the hands of the American people. Really, if your audience members are fairly liberal thinking, and if they are Americans, of course they're going to want this. She is speaking and she knows her audience. This speech does continue, but you see I end it here. And she ends with some nice parallel structure. We can do this. We must do this. And when we do, we will restore the faith of the American people, not just in our government, but faith in democracy itself. So ending with a little bit of parallel structure actually is a nice bow tie ending. It makes the audience feel good, feel like we are a part of this, right? She echoes this we 3 times, 4 times. Meaning that it's not just Elizabeth Warren's fight. It's not just a fight for businesses or wealthy corporations. It involves her audience members, and audience really does want to have a part of this and want to contribute to what Warren is saying if they are likely in agreement. So she is speaking to her base, and she is speaking to really reignite her audience and to have them join her. Thanks for listening.